It's 2025 and something huge just slipped under everyone's radar. The most important economic pact in modern history has quietly expired, and if you're not paying attention, you're about to watch your paycheck, your savings, and the life you know crumble in real time. For 50 years, every barrel of oil sold around the world was priced in US dollars. That meant every country needed dollars to buy energy. This created a kind of artificial demand for American currency that made the United States the most powerful country on the planet, even though, let's be honest, we produce almost nothing ourselves and owe everyone a fortune. But that system ended quietly, and no one's talking about it. Picture this. Back in 1971, President Nixon appeared on TV and told the world the U.S. was temporarily closing the gold window. Translation? The dollar was no longer backed by gold, just paper, a promise. And that promise was shaky. Why would foreign governments keep holding dollars if it was just a piece of paper? Why would global trade rely on a currency backed by nothing? 3 years later, a clever, and let's say, slightly devilish, deal was struck between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest oil exporter, agreed to price all their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. No euros, no yen, no gold, just dollars. In exchange, America promised military protection, sold them weapons, and guaranteed their security against regional threats like Iran and Iraq. But that deal wasn't just with Saudi Arabia. Through OPEC, it spread to almost every major oil-producing nation: Nigeria, Venezuela, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, you name it. Oil for dollars, dollars for oil. It was a brilliant scheme because if Japan needed oil, they first had to buy dollars. Germany, same deal. China, you guessed it, they needed dollars first. This meant the U.S. could print endless money, run massive trade deficits, pile on trillions in debt, and never really face the consequences because the world had to use the dollar. We effectively exported inflation while importing goods, and the rest of the world footed the bill. For 50 years, this worked like a charm. The dollar stayed king, not because of gold or economic strength, but because of oil. Every central bank held dollars and bought U.S. Treasury bonds. America could borrow at low interest rates because the world needed a safe place for their money. But here's the kicker no one told you. That deal had an expiration date. And we just hit it. In 2023, Saudi Arabia quietly announced they wouldn't renew the Petrodollar agreement. Not a single headline on the BBC or Sky News. Most Brits had no clue it even happened. But in the real halls of power, central banks, economic summits, they all knew the foundation just cracked. Saudi Arabia isn't daft. They've been preparing for years, building relationships with China, Russia, India. They joined BRICS in 2023, a club designed to challenge dollar dominance. Now they're accepting yuan for oil sales to China, rupees for India, even discussing gold-backed deals or baskets of currencies. Every move chips away at the dollar's throne. The numbers are staggering. In 2000, about 73% of global foreign reserves were in dollars. By 2020, that dropped to 59%. In 2024, under 55%. That's a free fall in currency terms. Central banks are dumping dollars faster than you can say pound sterling. China's cut its U.S. Treasury holdings by over $300 billion since 2021. Russia dumped nearly all its dollars after sanctions in 2014 and is hoarding gold instead. India trades in rupees. Brazil and Argentina use their own currencies. Even France is quietly reducing dollar exposure. The truth is staring us in the face. The emperor has no clothes. The dollar is backed by nothing but the hope that others keep accepting it. And that hope is breaking. Now, this isn't just about geopolitics or dusty old treaties. This hits your wallet, your savings. whether you can afford to fill the car with petrol or buy groceries next week. The dollar's strength was always propped up by this petrodollar system. When that demand vanishes, all those printed dollars flood home. And that's inflation. Not the mild kind you grumble about, but the wipe out your life savings in months kind. Think about it. For 5 decades, the world absorbed our inflation. We printed cash, and they held it, bought our bonds. Now they're selling, dumping, diversifying. When those dollars come flooding back, treasury bonds crash, interest rates spike, and the cost of everything imported, gas, phones, clothes, medicine, goes through the roof. Your pounds, your savings, lose value faster than you can spend them. And guess what? The government can't stop this. The Bank of England can raise rates, but that chokes the economy and makes debt unmanageable. They can print more money, but that fans the inflation flames and drives more countries away from the pound. No good options. Checkmate. That's why nobody in power is talking about it. Because if the public knew, panic would accelerate the collapse. Better to keep everyone calm, ignorant even, and let the disaster unfold slowly enough that most people don't connect the dots until it's too late. But the smart money? They already connected the dots. Billionaires are buying farmland. Bill Gates owns more UK farmland than anyone else. Not because he fancies a tractor, but because food always holds value. Ray Dalio, the hedge fund guru, has been warning about currency collapse for years, moving big chunks of cash into gold and foreign assets. Warren Buffett is shifting Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio away from pounds and into foreign stocks and commodities. Central banks are stockpiling gold at record levels. Russia, China, India, Turkey, they're all hoarding physical gold and shedding pounds. In 2023 alone, central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold, the most in decades. Why? Because they know the pound's global reign is ending. Even big companies are hedging. Tesla, MicroStrategy, and others are parking cash in Bitcoin and other alternatives, not out of crypto fandom, but because they don't trust the pound long term. Meanwhile, your financial advisor probably still tells you to keep most of your money in pound-denominated bonds and index funds. Either they're clueless or they're keeping quiet. Either way, you're the one who loses. So what now? The end of the petrodollar isn't the final collapse. It's the first domino. Oil producers accepting other currencies, already happening. Countries unloading pounds, already started. Rising interest rates making UK debt unsustainable, well on the way. Printing money to cover debt, fueling inflation, sparking wage price spirals. The nightmare cycle begins. And then the nightmare really begins. A currency crisis triggers a debt crisis, which triggers a banking crisis, which triggers political chaos. Food prices up 25% since 2020, energy soaring, housing out of reach for a generation, credit card debts at record highs. These aren't separate problems. They're symptoms of a dying currency. History repeats, every great reserve currency failed. Spanish dollar, Dutch guilder, British pound sterling. Each overextended, each debased their money, each lost confidence. The pound was global king after WBU, but look where it is now, a regional player. This time, though, the fall won't be smooth. There's no clear successor currency. The euro's a mess, the yuan's controlled and distrusted, Bitcoin's too volatile, and gold isn't practical for daily trade. We're heading for a multipolar currency system, a chaotic mess of wild exchange rates, expensive trade, broken trust, fragmented supply chains. It'll be fast. Venezuela's hyperinflation happened in 5 years. Turkey's lira lost 80% in a decade. Argentina's collapse is a running joke, and that's a country with far fewer resources than us. When the UK crisis hits, it won't be a slow decline. It'll be a stampede, everyone rushing for the exits, and there won't be enough doors. The government will clamp down, capital controls, forced bond purchases, gold bans like in the 1930s, a digital pound they can track and control. Every transaction watched, every purchase approved or denied. Not paranoia. That's what every failing government does. By the time they admit failure, your money will be trapped, your pension decimated, your savings worthless. They'll say it's for your protection, for stability, for the common good. But really, it's just buying time while the ship sinks. So, what do? First, dump the normalcy bias, the idea that everything will go back to normal, that someone else will save you. That's poison. It's not fixable. The math doesn't add up. The system is terminal. Second, diversify. Not financial advice, just history. Hold assets that hold value, real estate, commodities, foreign currencies, precious metals, productive businesses or farmland, things that matter when paper money fails. Third, reduce debt and stay flexible. Debt can be wiped out by inflation, but only if you survive the chaos in between. No job, no credit. Debt is a noose. Minimal debt, maximum flexibility, portable skills. Fourth, build networks. When the system fails, survival depends on community, neighbors, family, friends. These ties matter more than any investment. Fifth, educate yourself. The facts, the history, the trends. They're all out there. Most just don't look. The petrodollar was always a temporary fix, a power play, not sound economics. For 50 years, it gave the U.S. privileges no nation ever had, printing money that others accepted, borrowing without consequence, running an empire on borrowed time. But every empire ends, every currency fails. The script is written. The petrodollar dies in 2025. The pound's global dominance dies with it. Most Brits will be blindsided because no one wants to admit what's happening. But you know now. You see the pattern, the timeline. The question isn't if, it's when, and the answer is now. The empire's foundation cracked. Everything built on it is coming down. Are you ready? Because ready or not, here it comes. That morning I was sitting in my flat in York, nursing a strong cup of tea and scrolling through the usual headlines when a message popped up from an old mate, Simon. Mate, have you seen this? Saudis just declared no more petrodollars. Quiet as a mouse, but this changes everything. I blinked at the screen, nearly choking on my scone. No headlines, no fuss, just a whisper in the financial world that could topple empires. I decided to dig deeper. The more I read, the more surreal it became. For decades, the global economy had been propped up by this invisible thread, the petrodollar. Every barrel of oil, every liter of petrol, priced in pounds sterling's big brother, the US dollar. And now that thread was fraying, threatening to snap. I pictured the scene in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. The grandeur of the desert city, the gleaming towers shimmering under the scorching sun, and amidst all that, a quiet boardroom meeting where the fate of the dollar was being sealed. Perhaps the Saudi oil minister, wearing a tailored thobe with gold cufflinks, an understated symbol of wealth, leaning back in his chair, sipping mint tea and saying, "No more dollars." The implications hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just about geopolitics or currency markets. It was about us, people like me, Simon, and millions of others relying on stable prices to fill our cars, heat our homes, and put food on the table. I decided to call my old university friend Emily, who works at a London-based investment firm. Emily's sharp, always impeccably dressed. Today she was probably in a sleek navy dress with a subtle pearl necklace, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, carrying that effortless London executive vibe. She's the kind of person who can make a spreadsheet sound sexy. "Emily, what's your take on this Saudi move?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed. Tom, it's huge. The petrodollar system has kept the US dollar and, by extension, the global economy on life support. If it collapses, we're looking at a chain reaction. Interest rates will skyrocket, inflation will spiral, and governments won't have the tools to stop it. I laughed nervously. So, basically, we're all screwed? Not necessarily, she said, but it's going to be a bumpy ride. The smart money is already shifting into gold, foreign assets, and farmland. If you want to survive, you need to think outside the usual pension funds and savings accounts. Her words stuck with me. I glanced down at my own modest savings, tucked away in a regular bank account, earning about as much interest as a soggy biscuit. Suddenly, it felt like holding monopoly money. I started wondering about the people I knew. The retired couple down the hall, the young family next door, the small business owners on Micklegate. Would they even understand what was coming? Or would they be blindsided, caught in the storm without an umbrella? Later that day, I wandered into a local cafe, a cozy spot with exposed brick walls and the scent of freshly ground coffee. The barista, Lucy, was serving customers with a bright smile, her red lipstick and vintage polka-dot dress giving her a timeless charm. She joked with the regulars, tossing in cheeky remarks about the price of a flat white going up again. At this rate, she laughed, I'll have to start taking payment in gold coins. It was a strange moment, the light-hearted banter against the backdrop of an impending economic earthquake. Nobody wanted to admit the truth, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface. That night, I lay awake thinking about how quickly everything could unravel. The petrodollar system had been the invisible safety net holding up the global economy, and now it was gone. But if the system was collapsing, why wasn't anyone shouting from the rooftops? Why were governments and media so silent? I realized the answer was simple. Panic would be catastrophic. Better to keep the lid on and hope people don't notice until it's too late. And yet, the cracks were widening every day. As I stared at the dark ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real story was only just beginning. Something far bigger was unfolding, and the world wasn't ready. Tomorrow I'd start looking for answers, not just in the news or financial reports, but in the people around me. Because when empires fall, it's not the headlines that tell the story. It's the lives upended in their wake. And somewhere, deep down, I knew the petrodollar's death was just the opening act. The next morning, I found myself on the train heading south to Cambridge, a city that always felt like a blend of old-world charm and cutting-edge intellect. I was meeting Claire, an old colleague from university who had become an economist with a reputation for telling uncomfortable truths. I'd expected her to be buried in numbers and charts. But when she arrived, she was anything but dry, dressed in a sharp emerald green dress that hugged her figure just enough to turn heads without shouting for attention, paired with black ankle boots, polished to a mirror shine. A delicate silver bracelet peeked out from under her sleeve, catching the sunlight as she greeted me. "Tom," she said, her voice carrying that confident tone I remembered. "You're late. But then, if you want to understand the collapse of the petrodollar, you're going to have to get used to timelines slipping." We settled into a quiet corner of a bustling cafe, the aroma of roasted coffee beans mingling with the low hum of conversation. As she pulled out a worn leather notebook filled with scribbled notes and graphs, I realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary chat. "Let me lay it out for you," she began, eyes sharp behind stylish tortoiseshell glasses. The petrodollar system was less a financial pact and more a geopolitical lifeline. For decades, it allowed the U.S. to borrow freely, to run massive deficits without the usual consequences, but it was never sustainable. I nodded, sipping my black coffee. "So what broke it?" Claire leaned forward. "Several things. For one, global players like China and Russia have been quietly preparing for this moment for years, diversifying reserves, building alternative trade agreements, Saudi Arabia joining BRICS in 2023 was the final nail in the coffin. They're accepting yuan, rupees, even gold-backed deals for oil now. She tapped a graph on her tablet showing the decline of dollar reserves worldwide. Look here. Between 2000 and 2024, the percentage of global reserves held in dollars dropped from 73% to under 55%. That's a free fall in currency terms. I glanced up, trying to digest the weight of what she said. So, what happens when everyone stops needing dollars? The floodgates open, she replied. Interest rates spike. Government debt becomes unsustainable. Inflation soars. And the worst part? The government's usual tools to control inflation won't work because the problem isn't just economic, it's structural. I imagine the Bank of England frantically raising rates, only to crash the economy further. Sounds like a perfect storm. Exactly, Claire smiled wryly. And while all this is happening, the average person, like your neighbor, your family, will see prices soar on petrol, groceries, medicines, savings wiped out. Real wages stagnate. It's a social powder keg. I couldn't help but joke. So, basically, we're living in the sequel to the Great British Bake Off, except it's the Great British Bailout. She laughed. If only it were that predictable. No, this will be messy. Expect capital controls, digital currencies with surveillance baked in, and restrictions on gold ownership. Governments will try to lock down money to prevent a run. I shuddered at the thought, my every transaction monitored, my freedom to spend curtailed. Claire's voice softened. But there's hope. The smart money is moving into farmland, precious metals, foreign assets. Food and tangible things retain value when paper currencies fail. I thought about Bill Gates owning more farmland than anyone in the UK, not because he wanted to get his hands dirty, but because land feeds people. She glanced at her watch. Listen, Tom, the writing's been on the wall for decades. The petrodollar's death isn't sudden, it's the climax of a long story. But most people are still asleep at the wheel. I felt a chill. So, what's left for us? Claire's eyes locked onto mine. Adapt, diversify, build communities that can survive economic chaos, because when the system cracks, it's not just money that fails, it's society. As we stood to leave, she added, be careful who you trust with your money and your future. The landscape is shifting, and not everyone has your best interests at heart. Walking back through the cobbled streets of Cambridge, I couldn't shake the image of that emerald dress, the confidence, the knowledge, the urgency. The world was changing, fast and furious, and I was right in the middle of it. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a question gnawed at me. If the petrodollar's collapse was inevitable, who stood to gain the most? And what secrets were still buried beneath the surface, waiting to explode? The following evening, I found myself wandering the dimly lit streets of Brighton, the salty sea air mingling with the distant hum of laughter and clinking glasses from the piers' pubs. I'd agreed to meet Rachel, a journalist known for her sharp wit and even sharper instincts. She had that effortless seaside style, soft waves cascading over her shoulders, a loose cream blouse half tucked into high-waisted jeans, and ankle boots worn just enough to tell stories of long walks along the coast. A delicate charm bracelet jingled softly as she gestured animatedly, a silver locket resting against her collarbone, catching the fading light. "Tom, you haven't called in weeks," she teased, shoving a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm beginning to think you've gone full doom and gloom recluse." I grinned, though my mind was anything but light. "You caught me. But honestly, Rachel, the more I dig, the darker it gets. The petrodollar's dead, and no one's ready for the fallout." She nodded, eyes sharp. "I've been chasing stories on this too. The media stays quiet because panic sells headlines, but panic on this scale? Total chaos. So they keep it under wraps." We found a quiet corner in a seaside cafe, the scent of salt and fresh pastries mixing with our conversation. Rachel pulled out her phone, flipping through notes and encrypted messages from contacts in financial hubs across Europe. "Here's the kicker," she said, voice dropping conspiratorial. "The biggest players aren't just diversifying, they're gearing up for something bigger. Farmland, gold, foreign currencies, that's the safe stuff. But some are banking on tech-based assets, like Bitcoin and other cryptos." I raised an eyebrow. "Crypto? I thought that was just a fad for tech geeks and late-night Reddit rabbit holes." Rachel smirked. "You'd think, but Tesla and MicroStrategy have dumped millions into Bitcoin, not because they love the hype, but because they don't trust the pound long-term. It's a hedge against collapse." I chuckled. "So when the pound crashes, I can trade my flat for some digital tokens? Sounds like a bargain." She laughed, but then grew serious. "The problem? Cryptos are volatile, not stable enough yet to replace a national currency, and governments hate them because they're hard to control. I imagined a future where my every purchase was tracked, rationed even, while a rebellious few traded in digital coins beyond the government's reach. A tempting rebellion, but a dangerous one." Rachel's tone softened. "But the real issue is trust. The pound's been king for decades because people trusted it. That trust is evaporating. When it's gone, chaos follows." I glanced out the window at the darkening sea, waves crashing relentlessly against the shore. "So, what about us? The everyday people who don't own gold mines or tech stocks?" She smiled ruefully. "We get to rethink everything. How we save, what we invest in, who we trust. And maybe, just maybe, how we take care of each other when the system fails." Her words hit harder than the cold sea breeze. The luxury of ignorance was gone. The future demanded sharp eyes and sharper instincts. As we stood to leave, Rachel glanced at her watch. "Keep your ear to the ground, Tom. The most dangerous moves are made in silence." Outside, the neon lights flickered, casting long shadows on the wet pavement. I felt the weight of an invisible storm gathering, one that would test not just economies, but the very fabric of society. And somewhere beneath Brighton's cheerful facade, secrets were stirring, secrets that could change everything. A week later, I found myself in the quiet countryside outside Bath, driving down narrow lanes lined with ancient stone walls and golden fields stretching into the horizon. The sky was a soft, muted gray, the kind that promised rain but held back just long enough for a last breath of calm. I was here to meet James, an old family friend who had recently become one of the UK's most talked-about landowners. Not because he was flashy, far from it, but because he owned more farmland than anyone else in the region, and he wasn't shy about why. James met me at the gate of his estate, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a weathered face that spoke of years spent under the sun. He wore rugged jeans, a faded flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and sturdy boots caked with mud. His hands were rough but steady as he shook mine, a firm grip that somehow felt reassuring. "Tom, glad you made it," he said, leading me down a gravel path towards a sprawling farmhouse. "People think owning land is quaint, old-fashioned even, but I'll tell you, when currencies crash, food is the real currency." Inside, the kitchen was warm, filled with the scent of fresh bread and brewing coffee. His wife, Sarah, was setting the table, her auburn hair tied back in a loose ponytail, wearing a simple floral dress that fluttered softly as she moved. There was a quiet confidence about her, an ease that comes from knowing exactly what matters. James poured us both a cup of tea and settled into a chair opposite me. "You hear a lot about gold and stocks, but land? It's tangible. It feeds people. And when paper money fails, people still need to eat." I nodded slowly, thinking about the news reports I'd read. Billionaires snapping up farmland across the globe, preparing for a storm most of us hadn't even seen coming. "Tell me," I said, "how did you get into all this? Farming's not exactly the flashiest investment." James chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "It started as a hobby, honestly. A bit of land here, a few acres there. But when I started looking into the numbers, the debt, the printing presses going wild, it all clicked. The system's built on smoke and mirrors. When the petrodollar dies, all bets are off." He paused, eyes distant. "I'm not saying it'll be Armageddon tomorrow, but the writing's on the wall. Food prices will skyrocket. Supply chains will break. Owning land means having a foothold when everything else falls apart." Sarah joined us then, placing a loaf of bread on the table. "It's about community, too," she said softly. "Neighbors helping neighbors, sharing what you have. When times get tough, that's what keeps people going." I looked around the cozy kitchen, the worn wooden table, the faded photographs on the walls, snapshots of simpler times, yet somehow more honest. James leaned in. "You'd be surprised how many people think this is all far away, a problem for another country. But it's coming here. Inflation, shortages, social unrest. The question is, what will you do when it hits?" I swallowed hard, that familiar knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "And what about the government? Won't they step in?" He shook his head. "They'll try. Capital controls, rationing, digital currencies with strings attached. But in the end, no amount of policy can fix a broken foundation." As the rain finally began to patter against the windows, I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a thick fog. The petrodollar's death wasn't just an abstract headline, it was a warning, a call to prepare. Outside, the English countryside stretched calm and indifferent, but beneath that peaceful surface the ground was shifting, and soon everything we took for granted would be up for grabs. A few days later, I found myself back in London, the city buzzing with its usual frenetic energy. Double-decker buses rumbling past, the sharp click of heels on pavement, and the distant chime of Big Ben marking the hour. I was meeting Alex, a sharp-minded financial advisor whose office overlooked the Thames. Alex was the kind of guy who wore tailored suits with just the right hint of casual. Today, a crisp white shirt with the top button undone, no tie, and polished leather shoes that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His dark hair was slicked back, and his steel-blue eyes missed nothing. As I entered, he greeted me with a quick nod. "Tom, good to see you. Heard you've been digging into the petrodollar mess." I settled into the leather chair opposite his desk, cluttered with reports and screens glowing with market data. "Yeah, and it's worse than I thought. Everyone's talking about inflation, but no one's connecting the dots." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's because most people don't want to hear the truth. The system's built on confidence, and once that cracks, it all comes undone." He pulled up a graph showing UK government debt soaring past $2.5 trillion, interest payments ballooning. The government's already borrowing more than it can realistically pay back. If interest rates rise, servicing that debt becomes impossible. I frowned. So what's the plan? Raise taxes? Cut spending? "Neither's politically popular or economically viable," Alex said, shaking his head. "They'll try printing more money, quantitative easing on steroids, but that just fuels inflation further. It's a trap." I glanced at a framed photo on his desk, a family portrait, warm smiles, kids playing in a garden. Sounds grim. What about people's savings, pensions? Alex's eyes darkened. That's the brutal part. Pension funds hold billions in government bonds. If bond prices collapse, those funds suffer massive losses. People's retirements could be wiped out. I swallowed hard. "So what do you advise?" He leaned forward, voice low. "Diversify. Don't keep all your eggs in pound-denominated baskets. Look at foreign assets, precious metals, even farmland if you can swing it, and reduce debt. It's a noose when inflation hits. I nodded, feeling the weight of the reality sinking in. And what about cryptocurrency? Some people are betting big on it. Alex smirked. Crypto's a double-edged sword, volatile, unregulated, and governments are cracking down hard. But some see it as a hedge against currency collapse. I'm cautiously watching. He paused, then added, The biggest risk is complacency. Most financial advisors still push traditional portfolios because it's safe for them. But safe isn't the same as smart. I felt a flicker of anger. So people are being set up to fail? Not intentionally, Alex said, but the system's rigged for survival of the fittest. Those with knowledge and resources will adapt. The rest may get blindsided. He paused, then smiled wryly. Welcome to the real world, Tom. It's not fair, but it's reality. As I left his office, the London sky darkened with looming clouds, the first drops of rain falling. The city pulsed with life, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath the surface. And somewhere in the shadows, decisions were being made that would seal the fate of millions. The petrodollar's death was no longer a distant theory. It was a ticking clock, and time was running out. That evening I found myself in a sleek, dimly lit bar tucked away in Soho, the kind of place where the music was just loud enough to drown out the city's chaos, but soft enough to spark whispered conversations. The air was thick with the scent of aged whiskey and polished oak, and the low hum of clinking glasses set the scene. I was meeting Olivia, a political analyst with a reputation for cutting through the noise and telling it like it is. She had that effortless allure, dressed in a fitted black dress that traced the curve of her silhouette, paired with understated silver earrings that caught the light every time she leaned in. Her dark eyes held a flicker of mischief, but there was steel beneath the softness. "Tom," she said, sliding into the seat beside me, her voice smooth as the single malt resting in front of her. "You look like you've been chasing ghosts." I shrugged. Maybe I have. The more I dig into this petrodollar collapse, the more surreal it feels. Governments, bankers, billionaires, they all know something the rest of us don't. Olivia smiled knowingly. That's because they do. It's not just economics. It's geopolitics, power plays, and survival. The dollar's downfall shakes the entire global order. I took a sip of my drink, watching the amber liquid swirl. So what's the game plan? Who's winning? She leaned closer, voice dropping. Russia, China, India. They've been quietly building alliances, creating alternative systems. BRICS isn't just a club. It's a challenge to the old guard. They're pushing new currencies, new trade deals, and undermining dollar dominance piece by piece. I frowned. And Saudi Arabia? Key player, she said. Their move away from the dollar was a masterstroke. They're hedging their bets, courting China and India, even flirting with gold-backed oil sales. It's a signal. The old rules no longer apply. I glanced around the bar, wondering how many of the patrons understood the seismic shifts underway. What about the UK? Where do we fit in? Olivia's eyes darkened. We're caught in the crossfire. Our economy depends heavily on dollar-linked trade and global confidence. When that confidence breaks, we'll feel the shockwaves. Inflation, debt crises, social unrest. It's all on the horizon. I shuddered. Sounds like a perfect storm. She nodded. And the government knows it. That's why the narrative is controlled, the truth softened. Panic would be disastrous. I laughed bitterly. So keep calm and carry on, pretending everything's fine. Olivia's smile was sharp. Exactly. But the cracks are showing. Food prices up, energy costs soaring, housing out of reach. People don't connect the dots, but they feel the squeeze. I leaned back, the weight of it all pressing down. What can people do? How do we prepare? She tapped her nails thoughtfully. Stay informed, diversify assets, build local networks, but most importantly, question everything. The world you knew is ending, and the new one is unpredictable. As the night deepened, the bar filled with laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Olivia's words echoed in my mind, a warning wrapped in a challenge. The petrodollar's death wasn't just an economic event, it was the unraveling of a global order. And in the shadows, new powers were rising, ready to rewrite the rules. But at what cost? The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. A few nights later, I found myself standing outside a grand townhouse in the heart of Edinburgh, the city's ancient stone buildings glowing softly under the amber streetlights. I'd been invited to meet David, a former government advisor turned whistleblower, someone who had seen the inner workings of power up close and wasn't afraid to pull back the curtain. He greeted me at the door, his sharp features framed by a neatly trimmed beard, eyes that flickered with both weariness and fierce determination. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, open at the collar, and a deep blue tie loosened just so. A man who had once played by the rules but now danced on the edge. Inside, the room was lined with bookshelves crammed with volumes on economics, history, and politics. A single lamp bathed the space in a warm glow as we settled into leather armchairs. "Tom," David began, voice low but steady, "you're chasing a story, but the truth is darker than you think." I leaned forward. "Tell me everything." He sighed. The petrodollar system wasn't just an economic agreement, it was a pillar of global stability. Its collapse means more than inflation or debt. It threatens the very fabric of international relations. I swallowed. "How so?" David's gaze hardened. "When the dollar loses its reserve currency status, it weakens the U.S.'s ability to project power. Military bases, alliances, trade agreements, they all hinge on that economic leverage." I pictured the sprawling U.S. bases scattered across the globe, the invisible threads holding fragile alliances together. "But here's the kicker," he continued. "The powers that be are desperate to hold on to control. There are plans, secretive, ruthless, to manage the fallout. Capital controls, digital currencies monitored and manipulated, even suppression of dissent." I felt a chill. "You mean authoritarian measures?" He nodded grimly. "Governments don't admit failure. They double down on control. Surveillance increases, freedom diminishes. The digital pound, or whatever replaces it, will track every transaction, every move." My mind flashed the headlines about data privacy, government overreach, and the tech companies caught in the crossfire. David's voice softened. "But there's more. The financial elite are preparing escape routes, assets hidden offshore, private islands, fortified compounds. The rest? They'll be left to weather the storm." I clenched my fists. "Sounds like a dystopian nightmare." He gave a weary smile. "History is full of them. The fall of empires never kind to the many." I glanced around the room, the weight of the books and the silence pressing in. "What can ordinary people do?" David's eyes locked onto mine. "Build resilience, diversify assets, form communities. But above all, stay awake. The greatest threat is ignorance." As I left the townhouse into the crisp Edinburgh night, the city's ancient stones seemed to whisper warnings from the past, reminders that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. The petrodollar's death was not just an economic event. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and the clock was ticking faster than anyone dared admit. The following afternoon, I found myself walking through the bustling streets of Manchester, a city pulsing with energy and resilience. The towering glass offices reflected the grey sky, while street markets spilled color and life onto the pavements. I was headed to meet Sarah, a tech entrepreneur whose work in digital currencies and blockchain had put her on the cutting edge of financial innovation. She greeted me in a sleek cafe, her style a striking blend of business and rebellion, leather jacket over a fitted white blouse, dark jeans and ankle boots that clicked confidently as she moved. Her short, tousled hair framed a face lit by intelligent, restless eyes. "Tom, you look like you've been running a marathon," she joked, sliding over a cup of black coffee. "What's got you so wired?" I smiled tiredly. "The petrodollar collapse. Everyone's talking about inflation and debt, but it feels like something bigger is slipping through our fingers." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "It is. The old financial system is breaking down, and tech is both the cause and the potential cure." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She leaned in, voice low but intense. "Blockchain and cryptocurrencies offer a way to bypass traditional banking systems and government controls. They promise transparency, security, and decentralization. But they're also volatile and vulnerable to manipulation. I thought of the headlines about crypto crashes and government crackdowns. Sounds risky." "Very," she agreed. "But in a world where trust in traditional currencies is eroding, people will look for alternatives, no matter the risk." Sarah tapped her tablet, pulling up charts showing rapid adoption of digital assets in emerging markets. "Look here. Countries like Nigeria and Brazil are leapfrogging traditional banks, using crypto for everyday transactions. It's a revolution in how we think about money." I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. "And the UK? Are we ready for this?" She shrugged. "Not yet. The government's wary. They see digital currencies as a threat to control, but innovation moves fast and people's needs move faster." Her eyes sparkled. "The next decade will be about power, who controls data, money, and technology. It's not just economics, it's politics, identity, survival." I glanced around the cafe, imagining a future where currency wasn't just paper or coins, but coded strings of data, traded in shadows and light. Sarah smiled, a hint of challenge in her voice. "The old world is dying, Tom. The new one is messy, uncertain, but full of possibility." As I left the cafe, the Manchester rain began to fall, washing the streets clean. The city thrummed with life, on the brink of transformation. And somewhere beyond the storm, the future was taking shape. Digital, decentralized, and unstoppable. But not without struggle. Because every revolution has its casualties, and every collapse its survivors. The night air was cool as I stood on the rooftop of my London flat, the city's skyline stretching out in a jagged silhouette against the dark sky. Somewhere below, the hum of traffic and distant laughter mixed with the occasional siren, a reminder that life, for all its chaos, went on. But up here, with the wind tugging at my coat and the weight of everything I'd learned pressing on my mind, the future looked uncertain, fragile. For 50 years, the petrodollar had been the invisible backbone of the global economy, propping up empires and shaping lives. Now that backbone was splintering, and the world was bracing for a fall no one wanted to admit was coming. I thought of the faces I'd met along the way, the sharp economist in Cambridge, the farmer in Bath, the political analyst in Soho, the whistleblower in Edinburgh, the tech visionary in Manchester. All pieces of a puzzle revealing a story far bigger than any headline. But there was one thing none of them could answer. What happens when the last domino falls? Governments tightening their grip, societies unraveling in protest, markets crashing, currencies collapsing, people scrambling for safety in a world suddenly unrecognizable. And beneath it all, the question that haunted me: who benefits when everything burns? As I turned to head inside, a message pinged on my phone, an encrypted alert from an unknown sender. "They're moving assets offshore. Something big is coming. Watch the shadows." My heart raced. The game was changing faster than I'd imagined, and the biggest moves were still hidden from view. Because in the shadows, power never sleeps. And as the petrodollar dies, a new empire is waiting to rise. But will it be salvation or ruin? The clock is ticking, and the next chapter is about to begin.